She coordinated a project under the CEFIS program, International Institute of Social History, Amsterdam, to create a digital archive of select Mahila Samitis in Assam, and has been working to take these stories to a larger audience through publication, exhibitions, media, and a short documentary film, Hetu Monot Ase, that I remember. She is the author of the book Gendered Publics, Chandra Prabha Saikyani and the Mahila Samitis in Colonial Assam. Last but not the least, we have Dr. Solani Bare. Bare is a faculty at the Department of Cultural and Creative Studies, Northeastern Hill University. Welcome, ma'am. Thank you for joining us here. Shillong, Meghalaya. She's a folklorist, author, and poet. She's member of Khasi Authors Society, Meghalaya member of Senking Tang and Senkhasi, the social, cultural, religious organizations of the indigenous Khasi, and life member of All India Poetess Conference. Her research interests include folk literature, folk art, and craft, including textile. A huge round of applause for all our panelists here. Before we start the session, I request Dr. Shriparna ma'am, if she is here, to kindly felicitate our guests.
Felicitating with the traditional handloom shawl. Thank you so much. So we are all set to start the session. Dr. Barua sir, can we start it? Over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. And so this is a session on culture, which is on culture, materiality, life worlds. And thank you for this, for introducing all the panelists here. Northeast India in Contemporary Times. So as you must have seen from the brochure, the brief concept behind this particular session is that the Northeast India's cultural world is rich and dynamic in textiles, crafts, dance, architecture, folklore, festivals. These practices are deeply connected to traditional knowledge, women's labor, and local ecologies, sustaining the region's material cultures. We also have this aspect of contemporary communities are also experiencing new materialities and consumption patterns. In today's globalized world, the region's art, craft, and textile heritage have gained national and international significance, creating new economic opportunities, something that was also discussed in the previous panel, as you must have noticed. And to talk about some of these aspects, and perhaps in an academic way, so we have these distinguished speakers. So as you must have seen from the brochure also, that the panelists come from different specializations, different kinds of academic specializations, and so we would like to know from them some of their observations and some of their comments on certain interesting topics on which they have worked. I would like to begin with Dr. Hemjyoti, with you, because you have worked, your recent book is also out, and you have worked a lot on how to understand questions of weaving, questions of women's labor in a historical, long-term historical perspective from 20th century to the contemporary times. Would you like to share something, some of your views, or how do we understand this process? Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us and giving me this opportunity to share with you what I have been working on for some time. It's a pleasure to be here, such a well-organized and well-orchestrated, I must say, because it's such a huge scale that you must have someone, not just one person, but a great team working behind to be able to do this. So to come back to Professor Borua's question, historically in Assam and in Northeast India, women and weaving almost go together. They go hand in hand. And handloom weaving has been central to women's conceptualization, both in terms of livelihood as well as in terms of their self-expression and creativity. No wonder that Mahatma Gandhi said she weaves, women in Assam weaves fairy tales in looms. Before you go forward, I'd just like to mention, because we're in Delhi and we might take it for granted, because in many parts of India, weaving is a caste-based association. Weavers, by definition, are a particular caste. However, in Assam and in other parts of Northeast, weaving is gendered. For instance, in my own language, Assamia, the term for a weaver is hipini and buoni, and both these are gendered terms. So women and weaving are like two sides of the same coin. They are integral to, weaving is integral to women's lives. In fact, till the middle of the last century, that is middle of the 20th century, weaving was so central to women's domestic life and production that it has become part of our everyday, and it has found expressions and significations in culture as well. For instance, you will have bihu songs, you would have biyanams, replete with metaphors from weaving, particularly the women's part of the song, Otiko Isane Hormograre Mohura, and so on and so forth, all replete with weaving metaphors. So what I'm trying to say is that weaving has been an exclusively female domain in Assam and in parts of Northeast. It has been mostly done as part of household activity, household production, not a professional production, so domestic. And traditionally, the skills were handed down from one generation to the next, so from mothers and aunts and neighbors to daughters. And interestingly, till the middle of the last century, weaving skills were also linked to marriage prospects. So, Buakota Zanene Nai, does she know how to do spinning and weaving? So these were some of the. So one of the associations that I have worked on is the Mahila Samitis, early women's associations founded in the 1920s and 30s, and they saw that there was this deep connection between women and weaving, and they tried to tap this resource that women already had, the livelihood possibility that women already had, and they started establishing what they call hipini bharal, or weavers cooperatives, since 1928. In fact, they were so successful that till the 1960s, almost all the major Mahila committees across Assam had weaver stores or weavers cooperatives. However, currently, Tezpur Mahila Committee is the only Mahila committee who still runs the same weavers cooperative or the hipini bharal. So they're the only ones who are continuing, and I'll come back to why they couldn't continue. Now, what did the women do here in the hipini bharal is that they marketed their produce, riha, mekhela, sadar, and interestingly, I just want to give an example how phenomenal they were, that the Kamrup Mahila Committee at that time was being run by Majida Tayabullah and Shashi Prabha Hazarika, and they took out the hipini bharal advertisements next to major tea garden advertisements in the front page of the Assamia Weekly. So you can imagine the impact that they were trying to create and the kind of work that would need. These were many firsts for women, running accounts, going for a newspaper advertisements, doing the entry for objects. They also had a book section. So the hipini bharal was, or the weavers cooperative was, a conceptual space that they tried to imagine. Now, of course, this was all being done within the nationalist Khadi discourse, because the nationalists wanted to promote Khadi and all of that. What the Mahila committees tried to do is to push it further, and while they took advantage of the fact that the nationalist agenda was already pushing Khadi, they tried to push their own agenda, and by 1948, I just want to give an example from the 1948 Assam Pradeshik Mahila Committee conference, where they claimed for an yarn quota from Government of India. They were critical of Government of India. This was a new nation, 1948, and they were critical of Government of India that you are sending all the yarns to the factories. What will happen to the handloom female weavers? So please give us a dedicated yarn quota so that our female weavers can weave. And they had this impasse with the government for a long time. So what they were doing, and I'll conclude with this point, that in traditional, like I mentioned, if it is not a profession by caste, and if I'm not working in a factory, then I somehow do not fit into the idea of a labor or a worker. So the Mahila Committee was trying to conceptualize the woman as a worker and a laborer, though she is neither a laborer by the caste definition nor a laborer by the factory definition. So they were trying to push for the yarn quota as her right, because this was something that was important for them to use this as a passport for women to enter the new nation. Because without this, just only looking at it as a nationalist discourse of the Khadi, I felt was not enough. So as I mentioned, Tezpur Mahila Committee is the only one currently who still has Hipini Bharal. I'll come to what has happened in the 1990s with globalization and liberalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hemjyoti. It's a very interesting point that you have made, that how weaving is not only gendered, but how, because it is gendered, it is also connected to the everyday life and the cultural life world of women and women weavers. From that, I would like to come to Dr. Bare, Solane Bare, because you have also worked on questions of weaving, aspects of weaving in the Khasi society, as well as another very interesting thing that you have worked on happens to be what we call traditional architecture, basically living roots, bridges, So I was wondering, given your work, and you're also a folklorist, so given your work, how do you see it? I mean, in terms of the significance of weaving, as well as significance of these kinds of traditional forms of architecture with regard to the Khasi society.
Good evening, everyone. My subject or my research is on material culture. So material culture, which includes everything I can say materialistic, whether it is building a home or it is a monolith, erection of monoliths, ossuary, and mainly weaving and road bridges. So with regards to weaving, we can see that in the last 50 years in Meghalaya, the weaving process or textiles were concentrated mainly in northern part of the state and in Garo Hills. But for the last decades, I have seen an improvement, and then a speedy improvement in the field of weaving, especially with regards to Eriyan, which we call in Khasi Rendia. So Rendia nowadays is very popular among the masses in Meghalaya, and not only in Meghalaya, but also outside the states and even at the international level. Why it is so popular? This Eriyan is derived from the worm. Okay, it's derived from the cocoon. But of course, there are many Eri production center in Assam and all, but what I am concentrating is in Meghalaya. Because we have the yarn that is very good in quality, and then it is a natural fiber. Natural fiber in the means that it is collected naturally from the cocoon, and then spin into a yarn and made into a fabric. And at present time, you can see that in Meghalaya, they are making an export of Eriyan also outside, where people from outside, not only outside Meghalaya, even outside India, they had come only to buy the Eri products or the Rendia of the Khasis, which are very fine in texture, and moreover, it is environmentally friendly. It is very friendly because, as I said, it is a natural fiber. We don't use the chemicals, we use the natural dyes, natural fiber with natural dyes, which is also known as the vegetable dyes. So it is also branded now as the peace silk. Why it is a peace silk? Because animals or the caterpillar or the larva is not killed. So it is allowed to come out extracted before the yarn is spun. So that's why it is called peace, because we do not kill the insects, but actually let it come out. So in Meghalaya, we also have nowadays the product where the logo, I can say the logo, where the logo of the Megatex or the Sericulture and Weaving Department is the cocoon, the fabric, and the dove. As I said, it is a peace silk, so the dove is the symbol of peace. We are using this as the logo of the reindeer in Meghalaya. Whereas if we look at the root bridges which is made from the Ficus elastica, okay? The scientific name is Ficus elastica. Actually, I don't want to dwell too much on that because everyone have seen, you have read in the in YouTube, okay, in the internet. But the thing is that I only want to stress here how we preserve this very important heritage of Meghalaya. In the last year, in 2021, when I was still in Nong Talang College, that is in the border of Bangladesh, and then in 2024, this year, we had taken the project, the initiative, the students and the teachers, the initiative to rejuvenate these dying living root bridges in and around the villages where I am working. So this is the, we can say that the Indian knowledge system that an EP really stresses on that, we can find it in the folk tradition of the people of Meghalaya, especially I can say in the parts of Khasi and Jainte Hills. Jainte Hills, I mean in the southern parts of Jainte Hills. Okay, that is for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bare, for these very interesting observations of yours, especially that how folk traditions, if weaving and traditional architecture are forms of folk traditions and folk knowledge, then how they continue to remain very relevant and very vibrant and very significant, both at a practical level in terms of weaving and also at a level of symbolic significance for societies and communities. Thank you for these initial comments. This brings actually me to Professor Sarit, because you have worked you have a long experience of working in this particular field of culture, traditions, and also of indigenous communities in the region, especially work on Arunachal. So I was wondering, over these long years that you have worked on such societies, what kind of cultural change or transition have you seen societies undergoing or communities undergoing in this period that you have studied them? Yeah.
So thank you, Manjit. Welcome to all the participants, the distinguished panelists who are right now part of this wonderful session. Let me tell that first, thanks to the organizer who could have imagined the possibility of having such a great celebration of the spirit of the Northeast. And this is reflective of, if you just have a visit to the different stalls located around, you can understand for which Northeast stand. I didn't came with a very distinctive structured thought process, but as you have told, as I am part of this region called India's Northeast, I'll try to briefly and broadly, and I repeat it again, briefly and broadly shared my ideas in relation to the question of the tribe, the question of what we are trying to understand in terms of everyday's negotiation of life in the, more specifically in the Arunachal. I came to India's, what we call the Northeast in 1990s, and then still I exist. I didn't try to go back to any other places living this place. So in that sense, some of the people who came from different other parts of our nation state and made Northeast home, not house, perhaps I am one of them. Secondly, what I'll say that one of the scholars, who is no more, who was our former Vice Chancellor, Professor Annudacharan Bhagavati, some of you who are having deep interest in the Northeast must be aware of his ideas, his writings. Now he is the person who has brought me into the system And that time it was the Arunachal University, and then it became the Central University, and the nomenclature became Rajiv Gandhi University. I mean, there is symbolism involved in that. Now, Professor Bhagavuti, who worked among the Maoris of New Zealand for his PhD, and I think who has one of the person who has deeper understanding about India's Northeast and Arunachal, obviously, who has worked among the Northeast communities and in Arunachal specifically since 1960s with Professor Nirmal Bose. He told me categorically, he was a vice chancellor, but then being the member of the community of anthropologists, we spent a lot of sessions together. Now he used to tell me, perhaps nowhere in the world, the kind of transformation which we see in the Arunachal, the Nefa, has taken place. I'll give a very crude example, which I support, and I give a very crude example. The university which I represent, it's a central university. I think more than 70% of the students are coming from the different tribes of the state itself. If you look at the faculty composition, which is around 250, maybe around 40, 44, 50% of the faculties are also representing the different tribes of the state. If you look at the university administration, I mean, similar kind, they are the presence of the different communities of the state is much more. Now, if we take this as a kind, and the last vice chancellor who, not the previous vice chancellor, who is of course no more, was the first tribal professor in the state. If you look at this symbolism, I think nobody will deny the kind of change or positive transformation which that state has experienced. I'll just add a little bit information that as a part of the university Department of Anthropology, we had a 5 years long project with the British Museum, with the SOAS, which is, if you go to the British Museum's website, still perhaps it exists, called Tribal Transition in Arunachal. And that has given me the access to large number of archival documents, which is in State Archive in Assam and largely in the India Office, I mean in the British Library. And I prepared about 80 pages bibliographic stuff looking at the documents which are available. I mean, largely the colonial writings or the travelogues or even the manuscripts. Now, when I look at those documents and I look at my experience within the state of Arunachal Pradesh, almost 3 decades, in a very dispassionate way, I think there cannot be a different ways of understanding the kind of positive transformation which that state has experienced. But while talking about this reality, Georgium is here, I'll say that the other part of the fence also we should not overlook. You know, today, because of the Election Commission's initiative, the people who contest in the state assembly, for example, if you look at the declared assets of the candidates who have contested the electoral politics, you will see at least 70% of them what we call the crorepati. And some of them are coming from officially declared backward districts of the states that are having hundreds of crores, declared assets. Now, I'm not telling if many people of our country who can have thousands, millions and in their bank, then why not an Arunachali tribe can have few hundred crores? I think I am trying to talk about the kind of inequality or deep divide which is also part of this transformation process. And I'll end up saying right now that this is true, I think, in many of the northeastern states, the state which I represent. there are minor tribes, minor in a sense of I'm talking about their numerical strength, which is an incidental phenomena. And majority of these tribes, or we call sub-tribes, they are in a difficult terrain. And there is a tribe called, we call them today Puruik, earlier they are called Shulung. Now in my 30 years of existence within this higher education, educationally, I never seen hardly any representative students are coming from those communities entering into the periphery of the higher education system. So when you are talking about Northeast, when you are talking about the positive vibrations, celebration of Northeast, which Northeast really deserves, we should not overlook the other side of the realities also. The people who still have hardly access to the benefit of whether you call development or the different kinds of state or non-state initiatives remain far away from their life world. So, I mean, we should look at this dimension also. I'll end up here, but then we can take it forward further.
Thank you, Professor Sarit, for your thoughts. I mean, what I think is coming out from what you're saying is how if education is, or the culture of education is an important means towards development and growth, then how to make it more inclusive and have more people who can access the benefits of this culture of education and thereby social and cultural transformation. Thank you, Professor Sarit, for your thoughts. This, in fact, when we talk about culture and questions of change and so on, this, in fact, also brings me to Dr. Rashi. Though you have worked on something different, I mean, in your works, you have worked on the question of visual image, the question of visuality and materiality, right? And would you like to tell us something about this question of visuality and materiality, and how do we, because the work has been more conceptual, I guess, so how do you look at these questions, you know? Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'll join my co-panelist in thanking the organizers and appreciating the organization of an event like this, which has brought us to rethink a lot of different kinds of notions and perceptions that we have about the Northeast and revisit those ideas. So as Manjeet pointed out, my work is a lot more conceptual in nature, in the sense that everybody here sort of agrees to the fact that Northeast India has a very rich tapestry of cultural forms, both material and non-material. And when we look at these cultural forms, one of the questions that has intrigued me for a very long time was what makes certain cultural objects or certain cultural forms much more visible or much more relevant than the others. So, so it kind of brought me to look at the concepts of materiality and visuality, where each of these concepts helped me unravel the very notion of what makes certain things visible and make certain things more relevant. So, just for the benefit of the audience here, so materiality in a very simple sense is basically looking at how objects have their own agency, and certain objects matter more than the others, and when these objects become more significant, they sort of they create a certain kind of perception and meaning with regard to the spaces that they are in and the times that they are in. Visuality also, on the other hand, is kind of looking at the idea that there is a social construction of the visual and there is a visual construction of the social. So if you create certain things or prioritize certain things visually, then they have a certain social life of their own, and they sort of become more relevant and they become more visible. So when it comes to the Northeast India, my work was largely looking at the idea of how Northeast India has been the object of, and I say object as in quote and quote, object of inquiry for a very long time, starting from the colonial period and many decades after. So what really happened beyond that? Once we look at the various socio-political changes, the cultural changes, the historical changes in the region, and that combined with how social sciences, methodologies, and theories were changing, we came to a point of looking at the possibility of how Northeastern subject can be created. So these are attempts and very conscious attempts that I've found in my work where people from the Northeast, communities from the Northeast are trying to reclaim their subject position with regard to their culture, with regard to their life world, with regard to their worldviews, which fits really well with the parallel move that we have, emphasizing the indigenous knowledge system, sustainable development, sustainability, and so on. So the idea here is that if we look at the Northeastern region and we look at the material and the visual culture there, how do we understand those? And how do we understand it from the perspective and the meaning that are being attached by the people themselves? So in that sense, I took two examples. So one of the examples is to, how exactly do we look at the fashion that emerges from Northeast India? And when I say fashion, I'm actually trying to also give you the idea that there is a global discomfort with fast fashion that we have now, because we are obviously placing a lot of emphasis on sustainability. So with the global discomfort of fast fashion and the consequences for the environment, there is a turn towards traditional handicrafts, traditional handlooms, weaving patterns, as my co-panelists have also talked about. Notwithstanding the problems that come with them, there have been attempts to prioritize indigenous knowledge systems and the indigenous ways of, let's say, what attires are and how clothing can be looked at. That's fine, that's one way to look at it. But what really brings them to the fore is also the attempts made by a number of people who have brought these traditional attires in the form of global fashion to the global stage. So we can look at few designers from the Northeast India who have made it to the global stage, visibilizing and making the patterns and the traditions and the traditional attires from Northeast India as very significant. I can name a couple of designers here. So we have Sanjukta Dekka from Assam, who has recreated Mikla Sador as something very significant. We have, since we are talking about the Rindia and the Eri silk, we have Daniel Siam from Meghalaya, who's made it big on the global stage. I would also like to mention that we have Dr. Kiritsu here, who goes by the name of Mekla Nama, and I've been following her for a very long time. So on the social media platform, as an influencer, you try and bring forth the very rich tapestry of what traditional attires could be, what exactly is, let's say, patterns from Northeast India, and how you as a person from Northeast, as a person from community, so there's no cultural appropriation happening there. You sort of bring those things out to the world as something that belongs to your own community. So it's not something that happened in the colonial times or times after that, where someone else was trying to portray these things. You are doing it on your own, and you're bringing the values and the cultures and the meanings and the perceptions attached to it. I sort of agree with her when she spoke about it in the last session, that it's better to have imitation than the original ones, because the original ones have a cultural value attached to it. They have a very different meaning and perception that comes from the community. So that's one example that I have. The other example is to look at the bamboo products from the Northeast India. So the bamboo products, it's not that it's new. I think when we look at the Northeastern region, the use of bamboo products, the different kinds of things and objects that are created from bamboo has been there for a very, very long time. I mean, we can also call it for centuries. But suddenly, something that was considered to be a poor man's timber is now the green gold of the Northeast India. So, the focus on sustainability, the focus on ecological, preservation, the need to look for raw material which is not so harmful for the environment. So it has become an industrial raw material. But most importantly, also the government initiatives with regard to Atmanirbhar Bharat, Vocal for Local, has made something which was considered to be not so relevant. As I said, the idea of materiality, something that did not really matter on the global scale, is now considered to be so significant. So how the visual and the material aspects, as we portray them, as we visualize them, as we visibilize them, makes a huge difference to the way that indigenous knowledge systems, cultural forms, cultural objects, their meanings and perceptions can be understood. So with these sort of transformed and constantly transforming cultural narratives, we have seen Northeast region and the products from there, and of course people like, kind of owning up these products and bringing out the values that are there as part of the cultural values of the communities, has made that as the unique selling point of the visual and the sustainable economy that we are part of. So thank you.
Thank you, Raki, for these very interesting thoughts. I mean, one of the things which comes out from what you're saying is that when we talk about globalization, it is not necessarily that globalization is defining the quote-unquote the local or quote-unquote the regional, but the quote-unquote the local or the region is as much having an agency in finding its place in the global map or globalization process. That agency is important, that agency is interesting, and that agency is also, in a sense, a source of power, isn't it, for communities to self-define themselves on a larger stage. So thank you for these ideas and for these observations, which brings me to actually to Dr. Kanatu Chope, and he has worked on, till now our panelists have talked about well, by and large what we think as quote-unquote traditional in terms of weaving or textiles and change and so on. But he has worked on, you have worked on what one call new materialities, and that is something that is very much a part of our cultural practice now, the use of plastics, right? Exactly. And consumerism, the use of plastics, and how do we relate it to questions of environment, ecology, and so on. So your thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you, Manjit, for raising a very important issue. Yeah, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be part of this very important deliberation. Very quickly, I would like to say, just quote one scholar whom most scholars from Northeast India are familiar with, J.P. Mills. So if you look into J.P. Mills' writing, he says that wherever road goes, two things follow. One is venereal disease, and then the second thing is money lenders. So wherever road goes, he means that wherever development goes, these two things, very difficult forms of change that follows. One thing that I've been observing lately, and for me this is something very personal, my friend Thay knows that we have been really struggling trying to solve the amount of waste that is generated in Dimapur. We are generating about 140 to 150 tons of waste every day in Dimapur. And I've been traveling to Aizawl and all these parts, seeing the problem. We're just sitting on a time bomb. So for me, this is something, I belong to the region. That's my home. So I'm a researcher. Definitely it gives me a lot of avenues to study about the materiality, but it's also a pressing problem that we are facing. And then the problem is plastics. One thing that I would like to say is that as far as plastic is concerned, it's here to stay because it is cheap, it is affordable, it is durable. And then if you see, I'm just the panelists, the former panelists, they were discussing about how plastics are replacing the ornaments and other even the cultural artifacts. That's reality. Plastic is here to stay. It's like the government everywhere, not only in Nagaland, but even every other Northeast state, Eastern state, Professor Sharif knows, they're trying to ban plastic, which is not working. So it makes us think that how do we negotiate, or how do we, with fast modernization, with fast development that is happening, it made me think as an anthropologist. So it's like, because for someone working quite some time on indigenous knowledge system, I would like to say plastics starts where indigenous knowledge systems ends. That's the problem. I'm just, please, you are free to challenge me, but the problem with Northeast India is that this is a new form of materiality. If you look into Arunachal, Sikkim, Nagaland, Mizoram, Tripura, or even for that matter Assam, the materials that we used in our daily lives for our culture, for our housing, for all sorts of purposes, these were biodegradable. But plastic is one form of materiality which is completely changing our lives. And it is creating such an ecological, environmental hazard to not only Nagaland, but to all the states across in Northeast India. Very quickly, the recent study that was done by Center for Science and Environmental Research, they said that Northeast is generating about 3,100 tons of metric tons of non-biodegradable waste every day. And which is like, they say that 85%. This is a very conservative estimate because the CSC report comes only from the municipal areas. So if you look into Dimapur, more than half of the city is not under municipal area. So we are talking about the amount of plastics waste that is being generated. And then what CSC said is that 85% of our waste, especially the plastics, diapers, oh my God, big problem. These are going to lands, and this is actually polluting the water bodies. So I think the question here at this point is like, and for me, somebody being an academic, writing about this, but going to conferences and then, dealing with the issues. But the problem is this is a grassroots problem. And then how do me as an academic who knows that there is a problem, connect with the local communities? Is it possible for us to work together with the indigenous knowledge system to solve this big problem? Because I said that, Manjit, our indigenous knowledge system has failed. I think I'm making a very controversial stand. I'm not against indigenous knowledge system, but I think where plastic is concerned, I think our indigenous knowledge system seems to be rather redundant. It's not working. So I think we have to rethink how do we solve the problems of this new materiality, which is a kind of an intrusion in our lives. Very important, but it is also creating a lot of problems for the environment, even creating a lot of health hazard. That is what I want to say. Thank you.
So from what you have said, I mean, it's interesting contrast, isn't it? What Rashi has just now said and what you have said, that on this whole question of globalization, plastics is very much a part of our global presence, the global presence in the region and presence of the region in the global context. Both are interconnected. What you are saying is that community's agency, and what you're saying is also, yes, that is also community's agency, but in a non-biodegradable way, right? And what Rashi is saying is in a more ecologically sensitive manner, the global presence, which is interesting to see that how the region is not just one straightforward something matter, but it has different layers, different complexities. Like any other part of the world, it has these different aspects, different dimensions, which is very interesting. This, in fact, brings one to certain other questions as well. And this, I would like to go back to you, Hemjyoti. So when you had initially talked about this broad historical perspective of how we look at the question of weaving and women's cooperatives and weaving cooperatives and their role in defining gender, in a sense, or foregrounding the role of gender through something as basic as a claim on the yarn. Now, from that point onwards, from that 1950s that you have sort of ended, sometime in the 1950s, from that time onwards till the contemporary times. So how do you see, what has changed? That is one. And also now that we think in terms of investments, in terms of some of the things that different panelists have also talked about. So how do you see, where does it leave the weaver, so to speak of, in a sense, some of these questions were also taken up in the previous session, but one would like to hear from you. Where does it leave the weaver or our understanding of the weaver?
Okay, thank you. In fact, I'll carry forward what both Professor Bare and Professor Rakhi mentioned, with post-liberalization and 1990s, there is a renewed emphasis on handloom and handicraft, and thanks to like Professor Bhargava said, that there is now a global recognition of climate change and endorsement of slow fashion, sustainable fashion, and that has renewed emphasis on handloom and handicraft, and like Professor Sophie said, not going plastic, but trying to go biodegradable rather than non-biodegradable. So this, of course, meant a lot of opportunity for a certain group of people, and I'm glad that, it's already been mentioned, Sanjukta Datta and Daniel and, Anuradha Kuli, and there's so many entrepreneurs who have now taken up, created these designer boutiques, and, they have taken up handloom in a big way, and they have taken it to different stage, and Lakme Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week. You see, there is a certain kind of pride that is associated with being there, and that's a great thing. I do believe that entrepreneurship is crucial. Designer boutiques would be important to cater to a certain niche, audience, and yet there is a question, and I'd come back to the Tezpur Mohila Committee, that why did many of the Mohila committees actually have to shut down the weavers cooperative? And even Tezpur today, is facing that problem of lack of weavers and a gradual decline of the number of weavers. And when we talk to weavers, we realize that the glitz and glamour of the fashion week sometimes doesn't really reach back to the weaver or the art. I'm just saying weaver because that's what I'm working with, but it could be any craft people, it could be any artisan. So the first question is, I mean, when you're saying how do we go forward, what would be the suggestion, is to incentivize, that if and incentivize could be at many levels, it could be at monetary level. So if there is a product for, say, X amount of money, then how much is it going, how much of it is going in terms of percentage? Is it 5% going back to the person who's actually rearing the muga silk worm? How much of it is going to the person who's actually spinning the threads, making the yarn? And even from craft people to craft people. We know that all handicraft artisans and craft people have different kind of health issues. For weavers, I can say that eyesight and backache, these two are major, and we have Ayushman Bharat now, and many of the weavers are covered. But what we need perhaps is a kind of more target-oriented kind of health insurance, where when we talk about, because if one goes with a card that, I have a backache, and physiotherapy doesn't get compensated through insurance, right? I mean, so if we need to address it, we need to address it in a more target-oriented, and I'm sure, there are, government officials here representing the corporation. Unless and until we have a target-oriented kind of insurance system, health insurance system, it would not really reach where we want to reach. And health is a major concern, and we all agree that public health services are hard to access very often, though it's better comparatively than maybe 10 years back. But private health systems are, through the roof. They're so expensive. So how do craftspeople, kind of engage with life? And we talk of them as heritage sustainers, people who sustain our heritage. So how are we really looking after them in being able to sustain? So how do we make it lucrative for the next generation, for the new generation, to engage and sustain and continue with that craft if they want to, if they choose to, rather than going away? Of course, it's not necessary that everybody has to sustain. Now with weaving, what we have seen is that some of the motifs have been taken, and they have been taken and made into, say, bags. With that, okay, fine, it's a bag. But what I would like is that when we take this, Boro Aronai or the missing design or the Homia Pari and make it into the bag that becomes should be respectful enough of the craft that it has now embedded. That somewhere is not always happening. And we really need to respect the craft that we have appropriated, if we have appropriated a craft. That is very, very important. So that's something that we need to address. And I'm sure those who have addressed that have really done well. So in a way, if we have just made, copies in a way which is not respectful of the original, then it hasn't really gone down well. But copies which are respectful to the original have always, I think, done better. Last bit is about sensitization of ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I include also the entrepreneurs and the trading community who are working with these artisans and weavers and craft people. I'll just give an example. This is the season of paddy reaping in Assam. And many of the weavers, because as I said, weaving is still a domestic production, they're also downies, in the sense that they are also the ones who reap paddies in their own field or somebody else's field. So these are also part of their cultural life worlds, and they're not just weaver. They're not. It's not a caste-based thing. They're weavers, they're cooks, they're working in the paddy field, all of that. Now suddenly a designer would come, I have a order to finish by 20th of December, you just weave. That is not what we can do. That is not what I feel we should do. When we talk about professionalization of the craft and, encouragement of the craft, I'm all for that. But we have to respect the craft in its context. We have to respect the crafts people in their given context. So I hope that we facilitate through these platforms, through Ashtalakshmi, through NEHDC, all these different platforms facilitate a life world which retains the organic linkages, and yet they have the agency to go global. That is what I am rooting for. Thank you.
Thank you, MJT, for this some of these very important points that you have shared. And what comes out, in fact, is that when we talk about these traditional crafts, from what you have suggested, or in fact recommended, when we talk about these as well as on, in fact, you have worked on, I think, preservation of root bridges, isn't it, on in your earlier professions? So could you tell us something about if these traditional crafts or this traditional knowledge or architecture is so important to communities even today, they are very important, they are very relevant, very important, then what could be some of the ways, or you think, how have you done this, to promote it, to preserve it, that they continue to stay relevant for the community? Would you like to share some views?
So thank you. First of all, I would like to say, as a folklorist, we know the importance of culture. We know the importance of indigenous knowledge system. So as a folklorist, I would like to first, before I answer your question, that whenever we see any craft, whenever we hear any tales, we always try to analyze and to ask the question why and how. So with regards to weaving in Meghalaya, especially in one village, there is a genesis of the way they made the loom. The genesis is that in the village, one village in Ribhoi area, Sonidan, the name of the village is Sonidan, there was a story that a monster had disturbed the people too much, and they were trying too many ways to find and capture the monster. But at last, they could capture the monster, and they tied it to the tree, and that tree is known as the Tasong tree in Bhoi area. I don't have the scientific name for that. And then from then on, when weaving started, the people always use this Tasong tree as the main part of the loom. So that is part of a folklorist view. And we can say that this is how the people try to not only to manage how they weave their clothes, how they use, or we can say textile, combining dyeing and weaving, spinning, and everything. So we can see that how it evolves, how it develops till date. And with regards to this, we can say that yarn, I'm leaving this silk, okay, silk, mulberry silk and eri. I'm concentrating on this eri silk or eri yarn, which I am using this cloth also. It's made out of, this is also an eri shawl, and this is an eri kerwang, which is a penar dress. Okay, I'm not wearing the traditional khasi, but it is penar dress, or the dress worn by the people in Jaintia Hills. So this is how the people, how the work evolved from the folklorist point of view. And then we can say that in Meghalaya, now with what I had mentioned earlier about the logo, the tagline of this is that Meghalaya, made in Meghalaya, from thread to trend. I can also say that yarn in Meghalaya is from the worm to the yarn, from the yarn to the fabric, from the fabric to the fashion, and from fashion to international. Because nowadays it has gone international. We found so many problems in purchasing this yarn cloth, because always it is exported to especially Japan, Korea, and other parts of the world like UK and America. So that is with regards to the yarn weaving. But with regards to these living root bridges, what I had mentioned earlier is the rejuvenation of these bridges. You know, these bridges, as time goes, other bridges made of iron or cement, as time goes by, they will be destroyed, they will be spoiled, they will be rusted. But with regards to the living root bridges found in Khasi and Jaintia Hills, you will find as time goes by, they will become thicker and bigger and stronger. So that is bioengineering of the Khasi people, of the Khasi Penar people. But we find also in many places, like I mentioned earlier, that in my village, the people sometimes, because of the ignorance and all, especially the tourists, they will come, they will pluck, and they will carry something as their souvenir. So there are about 3 bridges that had been, I can say they are about to die, the dying bridges. So when we started to rejuvenate this one from our college, what we did is that we used this dry erica nut, the hollow dry erica nut, to take out those roots, and then with the topsoil, or if topsoil is not available, we use the cow dung, okay, to fertilize the roots. And then in 2021 we had started, but this time in 2024 we have seen the result, that the roots are coming out from those dying bridges. So this is the way I can say that Indian knowledge system should be preserved, should be protected at any cost, whether it is art and craft or this bioengineering. Because, and then one more thing is that I want to say here, these types of environmental products, this type of like living root bridges, they have also AI. According to the belief of the Khasi, when I say AI, it doesn't mean artificial intelligence, but it means animistic intelligence. That is when the people were trying to plan this type of rubber plant, what they do, first of all, as a folklorist I had observed, they will speak to the nature. They will speak to the animals. They will speak to the surrounding area that we are going to plant this type of plant, rubber plant, which will become a bridge for the people so that they can use. So that even Sigmund Freud also, he agreed to that, that plants, which we say they are non-living things, actually they have the souls. So when we speak, if the environment, if the surrounding area does not accept that, the speakers, the requests, the prayers, then that rubber plant will not grow. But if they know how to speak, to invoke the spirits in and around that, then that plant will grow, and then after 20 or 30 years, the people, they can use it. But interlacement and weaving of the bridges is very important. So I think with that, I can answer that. So we need to preserve and protect, whether it is it is textile, weaving, whether it is handicraft, basketry, or any other material culture, we should protect and preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very well said, in fact, especially the point that while in the contemporary times there can be situations when traditional productions, for example, the living roots, can get damaged or can get affected because of contemporary practices, let's put it that way. I suppose you were referring to tourism. So despite that, it is still, once again, traditional knowledge which can be harnessed to revitalize these kinds of traditional architectures and traditional, as we are calling, bioengineering. So this is a very good and practical example of how knowledge remains vibrant and flexible, and it somehow has the capacity to get innovated on its own in terms of its uses. That's just very interesting. Thank you so much. Coming to you, Professor Sharif. Just a small ideas, let's say, in the region, if you can collect, or table lamps, and so on, which gives us a sense of what has been the everyday life, maybe, of people across, whether it be urban, rural, across classes, rich, poor. They have all been using different kinds of material things to live life and give us a sense of this aspect of their life. What do you think?
Okay, thank you for bringing the museum dimension. But before I talk about the museum aspects, let me again back to Professor Bhagavathi. We are talking about the question of the whole issue of culture change or the transformation. I don't know how many of you have access. There is a fascinating writing by Professor Bhagavathi on the Tangsha identity issue. Tangshas are one of the group in Arunachal who are adjoining to the Burma border. And Professor Bhagavathi built up an argument, a conceptual frame, which I feel very interesting to look at, to understand the nature of transformation which is happening in the context of not only Arunachal, Northeast, in any part of the globe you can think of, especially in relation to the indigenous communities. Now, what he talks about that today, I mean, the impact of technological interventions, or what we perceived in the larger sense of globalization and liberalization, almost became passwords for understanding the everyday negotiation of life. We cannot think of and the moment you bring the fixity in understanding these two concepts as a bipolar concept, forgetting the continuum processes, then the problem, the illusion starts. And I'll say that there is a fascinating book. She was talking about the Hornbill Festival, The Invention of Tradition by Hobsbawm. It was published in, if I am not, 1986, long back, where they were basically argued that tradition can also be invented, right? So what Professor Bhagavathi was talking about, that the process which is coming out as a result of this, the intervention of different forces of change can be perceived as a kind of an, what he calls third order reality. I think that is very helpful in order to understand the realities within which we negotiate our life. There is a fascinating book came in publication. Some of you must have seen it, which is a visual documentation. It was part of our 5 years project with SOAS and British Museum. The title of the book, it was published by Brill, Germany, and their prices are so high, it's very difficult for common people to get it. The title is very fascinating. It talks about through the eyes of time. Now, where we have done, we had an ethnographic photographer called Michael Tarr and Stuart Blackburn, who was actually leading the project. We have the colonial photographs, hugely available in the British Museum. Even after the death of Hymenroth, his family has given all the hundreds of films, photographs to SOAS archive. And obviously, I have seen SOAS has preserved it wonderfully. I mean, that skill and technology they are having. Now, they have taken those photographs, and then there is an extensive coverage of contemporary photographs from different parts of Arunachal, and then there is a comparative, through the sense of chronology, through the visual comparative analysis, you understand the kind of change which has surfaced in the place what we call Arunachal today. Now I am coming back to the question of, again, this debate and how museum can play a very significant role. I'll give 2 examples. One, first I'll tell, somebody was talking about the museum in South India in the last panel. I think that museum came as a huge inspiration from the museum which we call Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya, or the National Museum of Mankind in Bhopal, which is located on 200 acres of land. In fact, that is the largest national museum leaving our Calcutta and the Delhi Museum. Now that was changed the whole notion of, or the concept of museum as such, what we call the new museum movement today, where museum is not much about the question of surrounded around the objects. It is much more the question of ideas. And if you look at the way, if any exhibition you look at there, it is the people who remained at the center of all exhibition. They are the main curators. Though we have professional curators also, but this is largely left to the communities to decide what are the objects they brought into the focus and how to arrange and whatever the different kinds of parameters involved in that. I'll give an specific example. Some of you are talking about the tribal architecture also. I'll just pass on the reference. There is another fascinating book came on the tribal architecture by Stuart Blackburn and René Coleman. René Coleman is then French architect. It's called Tribal Architecture, again Brill, but this is available even soft copy you can get. That's the fascinating book which talks about the strength of vernacular architecture. This is just for example. Let me come to the incident which I was trying to focus. Now, if you go to the museum in Bhopal, we have a tribal habitat. I remember in 2014 when
Professor
I was...
Sharit, can you also be a little brief? We're running short of time.
What I am trying to say that, with the Nagas and Wangchus also, they have a huge tradition of log drum. Wangchus call it kham in their local language. Now this is the longest, what they call xylophone or the musical instruments. And every bit of that log drum has special messages to carry to the village. During the days of headhunting, of course, suffixing the hunting, it may be debatable, I'm not going into that. But during the agriculture, they will have different kinds of beat. People will get surround together and go for cultivation work. Now, what is happening, if you go to the Wangchu areas today, you will hardly found these log drums and the dormitories, right? Because people talk about the Christianity and the sacred domain, many things are, I mean, I don't relate it to the 100% the issue of Christianity. There are other things are also involved in that. What I will say that after many years, when we have built up a traditional house, then people have built up a huge log drum. They have brought it from the village. And it was installed when the day was inaugurated. People from the city of Bhopal flooded to see the whole process involved in the installation of log drum. And this has given such a kind of an, I will say, the revitalized their belief in their traditional practices. After 1 month, I received a phone call from the villagers that they, after long years, they have rebuilt a second log drum in their village, and it was installed in one of their prominent places. This is an example to talk about that what part of the tradition will be promoted or revitalized, that has to be decided by the people. But there is a possibility always that people can really get involved and in the process can revitalize certain elements of their culture. I'll end up here, maybe take some other issues in the next slot.
Thank you, Professor Shar. It's an interesting point you have mentioned of how to involve people in when we are working out a museum, which is a form of representation. So how do we involve people, how do we involve communities, and take into account their views, how they would like to represent themselves? That's an important point that you have shared with us, and thank you for that. In terms of, this is for Dr. Kanato, in terms of, since you talked about the problem of waste and the new materiality of plastics, and the way it impacts environment and so on, so how do you see the way forward? What would you like to suggest as a way forward? Is there some way in which new kinds of ways, new kinds of understandings? It's just a thought, that some way in which, as we say, traditional practices of management of waste, and also global practices of management of waste, the best practices. Is there some way in which we can have a synergy, some way in which we can bring together some kind of a balance? Is that possible? Or how have people done abroad, maybe? Would you like to suggest something on that? Yeah.
So let me say something bad about Delhi. I think Delhi is point of no return. I've been to Ghazipur, and in fact, the recent study says that Okhla, which was trying to process plastic, has turned out to be such a poisonous intervention for the city. But the good thing about Northeast India is, as you said, we have something called community management. But just before that, I would like to say that if you come to the Naga villages, our villages are very clean. Khasi Hills or even Nagaland, you'll see this very beautiful split bamboo where they keep in the village, in the church, where people can throw. They just don't litter it. But the problem starts there when it comes to plastics. Or for that matter, I'm very thankful to our Honorable Prime Minister for taking this initiative of Swachh Bharat. So we have lots of green and blue waste bins all over Dimapur and Dibrugarh. I'm from Dibrugarh. Dibrugarh we have about 80 crores worth waste management plan, total waste. Dimapur, Kohima, Kohima has 33 crores total waste. And then I think what we are seeing here is that technology alone, it's not going to work. Even people's indigenous knowledge system management, that is not going to work. So what I see, the future is like, can we just, if it's possible, blend tradition and modernity, bring machineries, but involve the local communities. Our DMC, our municipal corporations are redundant. It's like beating a dead horse. It's not working. So possibly one of the reasons that why I've taken up this issue very passionately is that we are thinking like possibly if it's possible to take away this very important aspect of waste management, plastics, especially if we're able to reduce, recycle plastics, manage it, we are releasing about 35 to 40% of the pressure from the landfills. So the point here is like, can we take this management, not just leave it to the government or to the municipal councils, which for the past 60, 70 years, I'm being very blunt here, nothing is working out. So can the community take it, create jobs, make use of our customary laws? We have this, I mean, like very, for that matter, you know, we have this, till today, Nagas, we listen to the church, to the elders, and possibly that can be utilized to actually effectively manage the West. So that is where the traditional knowledge system, our values and our practices comes. But point here at the same time is we also, and that is where Northeast cannot be isolated from the mainstream anymore. When it comes to issues like plastic and waste management and other forms of waste that we are undergoing at the moment, is that perhaps the government come halfway where we get machineries, where we get technology. We are a very poor state. That, you know, as I said, plastic will go on until unless something happens. And where, when it comes to the local communities, make use of our social capital, our way of organizing. Delhi is a very chaotic city, so I don't think, even if you bring the best technology, I don't think Delhi has the proper social capital or social, management system in place. So maybe they have lots of money, but that's where I think Delhi is failing. So if we are able to do that, blend tradition and modernity, I think that's where our answer lies. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kanato. It's just that we're running a little short of time, so I'm having to cut short most of you for your recommendation suggestions. So that brings me to you, Rashi. Your last thoughts, suggestions, recommendations, a little quickly, but.
I think I'm going to take from all of them and kind of find it up with my recommendation. So one of the things that I would want to flag here is that it came out through the discussion that we are not looking at Northeast like, this homogeneous monolithic category, because there are various levels in there, at levels of culture, at levels of inter-community dynamics, in terms of, the relationship between the government and the community and their role in different spheres. But taking from my own work, I think notwithstanding the unique cultural sensibilities and the regional consciousness that has developed over a period of time, we have to remember that Northeast is part of a larger global framework now. So with the global flows, much taking a front seat, we still need to understand that that's not something that is prevalent throughout. There are levels at which different people associate differently to their own cultural systems. Sometimes you become more of a global citizen than a Northeasterner. And those clashes are what we have to also acknowledge and maybe work with. So probably as institutions, as government agencies, we need to include the community, we need to include the perceptions of the community, but also acknowledge not fall into the trope of exoticizing and essentializing Northeast again. So that's my last thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, with that, we also come to an end of this panel discussion, this very interesting panel discussion. And I suppose to sum it up, I mean, one of the points which has really emerged as important is to take the communities into account in whatever we plan, whatever we think, and whichever way we are looking at the future, to take the communities into account. And community is, of course, not a monolithic something. It is itself can be variegated in different ways, and how to keep the interests. For example, as Dr. Hemjyoti pointed out, the weaving has so many stages, so the community is at so many stages in that sense of the weaving community, and how to take everyone into account. That's one thing which seems to have come up very importantly in whatever we plan. And the other thing which I think has, and I end with this, the other thing which seems to have come up very strongly is that different organizations which are involved in questions of culture, I mean, for example, cultural products and creating products and so on, somehow it is creating these products or dealing with the products is not merely a matter of the product itself. It's not something purely functional and purely coming years, coming decades. That could be one way forward. With this, I'm sorry I have taken some time, and with this, we come to an end of this panel discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists for their great suggestions and recommendations, and though there is, I think, some, I mean, from my end and on behalf of our center, Special Center for the Study of Northeast India, who has conducted this panel discussion, I would like to thank the Ministry of Donor for the opportunity it has given us to do this discussion. I would like to thank NEHHDC for this brilliant organizational support that we have received in doing it. And I would like to thank our university administration for the support, and the audience and the staff and everyone. So thanks. It was a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your time. It was indeed an enriching session. All our participants, thank you today for joining us here. It's been a pleasure to host such a thought-provoking session. A big thank you to our distinguished speakers for their valuable insights, and to everyone for their active engagement discussion. A special thank you to all the members of NEHHDC for hard work, for making this entire event, in fact, a success story. With this, we come to the conclusion of this session. Now, I would like to request Dr. Sriparna Barua ma'am and Ms. Monalisha Das to kindly make your way to the dais. We have a small gifts for each of our panelists as a token of appreciation, please. Thank you.